At midnight, on December 3, 1984, a cloud of poison rolled over Bhopal, and thousands gasped their last breaths. In the industrial district of Hazira, Union Carbide India Limited's pesticide plant released roughly 40 tons of methyl isocyanate, MIC, into the night air, turning the city's streets into an invisible battlefield. The disaster would claim between 2,500 and 3,000 lives within hours, eventually rising to more than 16,000 deaths as the toxic legacy unfolded. What no one knew at the time, what would remain hidden for decades, was that senior executives had been warned of the very flaws that turned a routine leak into a catastrophe. Union Carbide's Indian subsidiary had operated the Bhopal plant since 1969, producing the insecticide 7 for a booming agricultural market. Internal safety audits from the early 1980s repeatedly flagged critical deficiencies, corroded valves on the MIC storage tanks, an underpowered refrigeration system that should have kept the gas at safe temperatures, and emergency protocols that were either incomplete or never rehearsed. Yet senior management chose to postpone costly upgrades, citing profit margins and competitive pressure. The plant's safety culture had become a series of compromises, each one eroding the barrier between industrial ambition and human vulnerability. On that fateful night, water entered Tank 5, a storage vessel holding over 42 tons of MIC, triggering an exothermic reaction that rapidly increased pressure inside the tank. Safety valves, already weakened by corrosion, failed to release the surge. Within minutes, a massive plume of toxic gas escaped through a cracked vent pipe and surged into the surrounding neighborhoods. Residents, many of them sleeping, were awakened by a choking smell and a sudden burning in their throats. Children screamed, mothers clutched coughing infants. The city's emergency services were overwhelmed, hampered by inadequate protective gear and a lack of clear instructions from plant officials. Within the first 24 hours, hospitals overflowed with victims suffering from severe respiratory distress, eye irritation, and chemical burns. Doctors described a scene of chaos. Patients arrived blind, unable to speak, their skin blistering under the relentless assault of MIC. The official death toll rose quickly. 2,500 to 3,000 bodies were identified in the days that followed. But the true human cost was already seeping into the city's fabric. Over 500,000 people would later report chronic health problems ranging from asthma and bronchitis to neurological disorders and cancers. Children born to exposed mothers began showing alarming rates of birth defects, a silent echo of the night's horror. As the city reeled, Union Carbide's chairman and CEO, Warren Anderson, boarded a private jet and left India within days of his arrest. Detained briefly on charges of culpable homicide, he was released on bail under conditions that were never enforced, and he never returned to face trial. The legal battle that followed stretched across continents. Indian courts sentenced him in absentia, while U.S. authorities declined extradition. Anderson's flight became a stark symbol of corporate impunity, a powerful executive walking away from the very people whose lives his decisions had shattered. In 1989, after years of protracted negotiations and mounting public pressure, Union Carbide agreed to a settlement with the Indian government worth $470 million. Divided among more than 500,000 victims, the payout averaged less than $500 per person, an amount insufficient even for basic medical care, let alone compensation for lost lives and enduring suffering. Critics argued that the agreement was engineered to silence survivors and prevent further litigation. The settlement did not address long-term environmental contamination. The plant site remained riddled with heavy metals and organic pollutants that continued leaching into groundwater. When Dow Chemical acquired Union Carbide in 2001, it inherited a legacy of unresolved liability. Despite owning the corporate entity responsible for the disaster, Dow has consistently denied legal responsibility for the Bhopal site, citing the settlement as final and asserting that the plant's operations had ceased long ago. Yet groundwater samples, taken decades after the leak, still reveal elevated concentrations of mercury, lead, and other toxic compounds. Communities surrounding the former plant continue to draw water from wells contaminated by these remnants, perpetuating a cycle of exposure that began with a single night of negligence. The Bhopal tragedy is more than a historical footnote. It is an ongoing wound that refuses to close. Children born decades later still bear the genetic scars of their parents' exposure, birth defects, neurological impairments, and cancers that echo the original disaster. Activists and survivors persist in demanding comprehensive remediation, proper medical care, and true accountability from corporations whose profit motives once eclipsed basic human safety. The story of Bhopal forces us to confront a broader pattern: when regulatory oversight is weak, when cost-cutting overrides precaution, and when powerful entities can evade justice, the consequences are not confined to a single event. They become systemic. In reflecting on that night in December 1984, we see how a combination of ignored warnings, corporate hubris, and legal loopholes turned an industrial accident into one of the world's worst environmental catastrophes. The poison may have dissipated into the air, but its residue lingers in contaminated soil, in the health records of survivors, and in the collective memory of a city that learned too late that profit should never outweigh human life. The shadows cast by Bhopal remain, urging us to demand vigilance, transparency, and responsibility from those who wield the power to shape our world.